Hi, Algebra. This is your 6-1 notes, Part C or Part 3. These are still talking about exponent properties, but what we're going to introduce is a negative exponent. Okay, so when we are simplifying our negative exponents, you cannot have any negative exponents in your final answer. So we need to make sure that they are always positive. Okay, so when we have negative exponents, what we do is we move them to the opposite side of the fraction bar, Okay, so what I also want to point out here is that when we're talking about a negative symbol also just means the opposite. So whenever you see a negative exponent, it's saying that it's in the opposite spot of where it should be. So if we take a look, this is technically in the numerator of the fraction because it's a whole number, right? So in order to turn it into a fraction, we put a 1 underneath. So it's in the numerator. So if it's in the opposite spot of where it's supposed to be, we flip it down to the denominator to get it where it is supposed to be correctly. Okay, so that's why the final answer is 1 over x squared. I also like to think about this as happy and mad exponents, as silly as that is. As of right now, at the beginning, our exponent is mad. It is not where it's supposed to be. It is not happy being in the top. So where we need to move it in order to make it happy, we have to flip its mood from mad to happy. We're flipping the mood. So we're flipping the fraction so that now it is 1 over x squared, and now our exponent is happy because it's where it is supposed to be. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we are going to dive in. So our first example, we have negative 5x to the negative 6. So the first thing I'm going to do is expand it out. So this is technically negative 5 times x to the negative 6. They're separate. That negative 6 belongs to the x. All right, so I see that I have a negative exponent. That is not allowed. So what I'm going to do is I am going to flip that mood. Okay, so in order to flip it, I need to make it a fraction. If I'm going to make the x to the negative 6 a fraction, I'm also going to make the negative 5 into a fraction, just so I know what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flip my negative exponent so that it is happy now. Okay, so leaving negative 5 over 1 as a fraction, but we flipped our negative exponent and our fraction, so now it is x to the 6th in the denominator. Okay, and the x to the negative 6 became x to the positive 6 because we flipped that mood. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to finish the problem. How do you multiply fractions? You multiply them straight across. So our final answer should be negative 5 over x to the happy positive 6. Okay. Looking at 11x to the negative 2 and y to the 0. So, spreading this out so that I can really see what's going on, 11 times x to the negative 2 times y to the 0. All right, so working from left to right, I notice that I have an x to the negative 2, so we need to make that happy. In order to do that, we're going to flip the mood, so we're going to flip the fraction. So the x to the negative 2 is going downstairs. If I am making that a fraction, I'm going to make everything else a fraction. Okay? But what I notice is that I have a y to the 0 right here, y to the 0. So when we have a y to the 0, what we really can do is automatically just change that to a 1. So now I have 11, 1, okay, 11 over 1, times, we flipped our fraction, so it's 1 over, it's now a happy exponent, times 1, okay? But anything times 1 is itself, so we don't even really need to see that. So we can finish our final answer by multiplying straight across And our final answer is 11 over x to the power of 2 because we have a positive, happy exponent now. Okay? So why don't you guys go ahead and try this one on your own, and you can check back into the content library for complete answer to make sure you got it right. So for right now, we're going to go ahead and jump on to this next example. So when in doubt, stretch it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 times x to the negative 5 halves times 4, and right here we can also split this up, times x to the 1/3. Okay? So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reorganize this so that I have all of my like terms all together. Because what I see is I have a 2 and a 4, and I have x's. So x here, x here, x here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rearrange those so that I can see them a little better. 2 times 4, so I've got all my blues together, times x to the negative 5 halves times x, and we can't see it, but we know it's there. There's technically a 1 there. And then times x to the 1/3. So all of our greens together. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to combine what we have. So 2 times 4 is 8. Next, we have fractions. But we have all the same base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my exponents and I just need to add them together. I do not have common denominators, so I need to change them so that they have common denominators. So let's change this to be a 1/1. So now what I can do is find that common denominator. I can find a common denominator of 6 for these. So that changes my answer up top to a -15, a 6/6, and a 2/6. So now we can just add all of our exponents together. -15 plus 6 plus 2 is technically x, and I'm going to keep it separated because I'm getting a negative number, to the -7/6. Okay, but I am not finished. I notice that I still have a negative exponent. It is not happy, so we need to make it happy by flipping it, flipping that fraction, flipping its mood to the other side. Once I make one a fraction, I'm going to make the other a fraction. So now I have 8/1 times, flipping that fraction, x to the now positive 7/6, and then we can multiply straight across. So my final answer is 8 over x to the 7/6. And leaving it written like that. All right, you can go ahead and try the next two on your own. Remember that when you see parentheses, all that means is multiplication. We're going to jump down to this middle problem here. So bottom third row in the middle problem, okay? Because we are adding one piece of information here. So we've got our exponents taken to an exponent. So let's go ahead, and when we see something like this, we are going to go ahead and distribute. That's probably going to be the easiest thing first. So let's get rid of this -1/2 by distributing it to the parentheses it belongs to. Okay, it does not belong to this first one, only that second one. So we are going to distribute that out. So I did not touch x to the -2. I did not touch y to the 4th. But what I did do is I took 12 times -1/2, which is x to the -6. I did take y to the 18th, and 18 to the -1/2 is a -9. So what I notice is that I have two x's, and I have two y's. So I'm going to rearrange so that I can see them a little bit better. So I have x to the -2 times x to the -6, and I can put my y's together. That way I can really see what's going on. So at this point, I'm still not going to worry about my negatives. Some of you might be saying, well, why aren't we flipping those negatives? Because we're going to see what happens here. It's usually easier to deal with them at the end than it is to deal with them at the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and combine my x's. So when I have the same base but different x's or exponents, I can add those together. So now I have x, -2 plus -6 is a -8 times, and now I can combine my y's. So now I have y, 4 plus -9 is a -5. So now we have our negative exponents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my x to the -8, flip that mood, make that a happy exponent. What I'm going to do next is take my -5, turn it into a fraction, and flip that exponent. Okay, so notice they are both being flipped. So what that leaves me with is 1 in the numerator, because we still have to keep something in the numerator, because if they're both moving to the denominator, you can't have nothing on top. So our final answer is x to the 8th and y to a +5. So because we moved them, they are now happy as can be. Okay? So being extra careful about that example. All right, we've got one more example in this section before we move on to another property when we're talking about division. Okay? So again, I notice in the first half, I have this exponent to an exponent. So we are going to get rid of that first. So I'm going to take my -1/4 and we are going to distribute that to everything. That 16 has an exponent of 1 on it, because if we spread it out, that's 16 times x to the 12th. So now what I have is 16 to the 1/4 times x. 12 times 1/4 is technically 3, times 1/4 of 20 is 5. Times, and I touched nothing on the right side, so x to the -6, and I'm just stretching it out to make it look easier, okay, so that I can see everything that's going on. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find some like terms. So I see x to the 3 and x to the -6. They have the same base. I see y to the 5th and y to the -8. 16 to the 1/4 has nothing, so I'm going to leave it as 16 to the 1/4. I'm going to go ahead and push these numbers together. So now I have x to the 3rd times x to the -6 times y to the 5 times y to the -8th. So combining my blues and combining my oranges, which you could have done at the beginning. You didn't need to do this extra step. So if you can jump to this next one, that's great. So now we have 16 to the 1/4 times 3 minus 6 is a -3 times 5 plus, so remember, we're adding these numbers because same base, we add the exponents. So -5 minus 8 is a -3. Just making sure I have that right. Sorry, you guys. So I have x to the -3 and y to the -3, because 5 minus 8 is -3. So now I still have negative exponents, which is not something we are allowed to do. So what I'm going to do is make my exponents happy. So I'm going to put this over 1, put this over 1, because I need to flip that mood of my exponents. So flipping those exponents so they're happy. But what I make, once I make them fractions, I'm going to make everything fractions so that I can be extra careful about where my numbers belong. So I moved my x and my y to the denominator. So now I have x to the 3 and y to the 3. But notice that I left the 16 and 1/4 in the numerator. So my final answer is 16 to the 1/4 over x to the 3 and y to the 3rd. Okay? So that is my final answer. We haven't done anything with that fraction yet, so you leave it as a fraction. All right. Moving on to negative exponent properties when we are talking about quotients. So now what we're doing is we are talking about this in terms of division. That's all that means. So when we have a quotient with negative exponents, our job is to move the terms with the negative exponents first. Make those exponents positive first. So that is the opposite of what we did here. We did not move those negative exponents up above. But when we are doing division, we do want to move those exponents first. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at our first example. So I have x to the negative 2. That is on the top. It is an angry exponent, so I'm going to move them down. Okay? So moving x downstairs. I see an x to the negative 4. It is in the denominator, but it should be in the numerator. So I'm moving it first. Okay? All positive exponents. So I'm switching those two numbers. So now I have x to the 4th times y to the 5th over x squared times y to the 3rd. Everything is positive now. We took our x to the 4th and moved it up top. We took x squared and moved it on bottom because they were in the wrong spot. Okay? So now what we're going to do, we are going to go ahead and simplify using our quotients. So we are going to take and we're going to circle these two x's because they're the same and our y's because they're the same. So finding our like terms. So now I have x 4 minus 2 times y, which is 5 minus 3. So my final answer is x to the 4th and y to the power of 2. And leaving it in that form. So once we deal with our positive exponents, we do not have to deal with them at the end. So this is saving us time all the way in the end. Okay? So jumping into that second one, we are going to move first. So I see a negative exponent here. And so I'm going to move that upstairs. I see a negative exponent here. So I am going to move that upstairs. So notice I just took everything out of the denominator. So when I write my answer, I have x times, I have x to the 3/2 times, and I moved my x to the negative 3/4 upstairs. So now it's x to the 3/4. They're happy now. Times y, times our new y to the 1/2. So moving those in the numerator. So if I drew a fraction bar, everything's on top. Okay? So we don't even really need to see that because we don't need to see that one. So now what we're going to do is we are going to combine. So I see these together first. So I'm going to combine them. And now that we're doing multiplication, all I need to do is add those exponents because it's the same base. So I'm going to get my first exponent to have the same denominator. So 4, so I had to multiply that by 2. So now it's 6/4. So now I have x to the 9/4 because we added those together, x to the 9/4. And then I have y. Technically, there is a 1 here. Okay. So now when I take my fractions and I combine my y's, we are adding those exponents. So turning this into a fraction, I need a 2 in the denominator, which means I need a 2 in the numerator. So now I have 2 over 2 plus 1/2, which is y and 3/2. And that is my final answer. Okay? Oh, I did the simplifying. So this is the simplified version. So that should have been down below. Okay? So moving some so they're all at the top. and then simplifying. Okay? You can go ahead and try that next one on your own. Move them first. What does that look like once you move them? And then simplify them. And you can check your answer with the content library. All right, jumping down, we are going to do this example here and this example here, and then we are going to be done. All right, so looking at 5x to the negative 1/2. So before we do anything, we are moving, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and separate those. 5 times x to the negative 1/2, parentheses to the 2. Do not distribute that 2 yet. Let's move first. So I see that I have a negative 1/2 here first. So the first thing I'm going to do is flip that to be happy. So once I make one a fraction, I'm going to make the other one a fraction. So now I have inside my parentheses 5 over x to the 1/2 because the x is now in the denominator. Okay, if you need to see how that's written out, this was technically 5 over 1 times 1 over x to the positive 1/2. So I multiplied straight across to get 5 over x to the 1/2. Okay, but remember, all of that was taken to the power of 2. So what I can do now is take my 2 and I can distribute it, share the love. So sharing it to the 5. Remember, if you cannot remember that this is 5 to the 1 power, you need to write that in there. So 2 times that 5, and then we're also going to share the love downstairs. So now I have 5 to the power of 2 over, and half of 2 is x to the power of 1. So we can simplify. We know what 5 to the power of 2 is. That is 25 over, and x to the power of 1 is just x. So leaving that as our final answer. Okay? You can do this middle one if you would like some independent practice, but we're going to go ahead and jump into this meatier problem here. So this is as big as it's going to get. So remembering all of the rules we've done up until this point, we are going to combine all of them, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find my negative exponents. Let's move the negative exponents first. Get rid of them, okay? So the first negative exponent I see is an x to the negative 3. I'm going to take that and put that upstairs. The next exponent that I see that is negative is y to the negative 2. I am going to move that to the opposite side. We are flipping it to the opposite side. Then the next thing that I see is z to the negative 1/3, and I'm going to flip it upstairs. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this problem so we can see where all of our numbers are. And as we do that, I'm going to stretch it out, okay? So I have 36 times. I did not move the x to the 5th. However, I did move x to the negative 3, but since I moved it, he's happy. He's happy now. I moved that x to the negative 2, so it's not there anymore. And now I have z to the 2/3. But I moved the z to the negative 1/3 upstairs, so now it's z to the happy 1/3. Yay! Okay, so all of that is over. 4, I didn't touch it because it's not highlighted. I moved the x to the 3rd. It's upstairs now. It is not downstairs, so it's not there. Then I have y to the 4th, so times y to the 4th. I moved the y to the 2nd downstairs, so now it's y to the 2nd. Downstairs now. And that's it. Everything else is up in the numerator. So I have nothing else to write down except I have to bring my exponent and parentheses. Okay. So now what we are going to do is we are still not distributing. Do not distribute. We are going to simplify in parentheses everything we can simplify first. Okay? So I notice that I can do 36 and 4. When I simplify 36 and 4, 9 and 1. Okay, so now I have 9, and I'm going to draw a fraction bar pretty long because I don't know how much I'm going to have on top or on bottom. So now I have 9 over 1. That's what we just did in purple. Okay, then I have my x's. So I'm going to do my x's right here. Okay, I have x to the 5th and x to the 3rd. So what I can do is add those together. So I'm going to have, because it's the same base, so if I do these, that's 5 plus 3. So that is x to the 8th. All right. Now, I see that I have z's. So I'm going to take my z's, and I can add those together because same base, add those exponents. And lucky for us, they have the same denominator. So now I have z, adding those exponents, which is 3 over 3. Okay, but what is 3 divided by 3? That is just 1. Okay, you can write that 1 in there, but you really don't need it. You can leave it alone. You can leave it blank. Okay, but I'm going to leave it there just in case. And then last but not least, I have y to the 4th and y to the 2nd. It's multiplication in the denominator, so I just add those exponents together. So now I have y still in the denominator. 4 plus 2 is 6. Okay? Now, all of this is still being taken to the 1/2 power. I have not touched that 1/2 power, so I'm bringing it down. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 1/2 and I'm now going to distribute because I have no negatives. I'm down to only one letter each. So now I can take 1/2 to the 9. I can take 1/2 to the 8, 1/2 to the 1, 1/2 to the 1, and 1/2 to the 6. Okay? So now what I'm going to have in my final answer is 9 to the 1/2. And I'm actually going to write that in pink. To the 1/2. I have x, half of 8 is 4. I have z, 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. Over, sharing the love, 1 to the 1/2. And because we're multiplying, you guys, that changes what that 1 is. So we need to keep 1 to the 1/2. That's important. Okay? So it's 1 to the 1/2 over y to the 6. Okay? We actually can get rid of this 1/2 because 1 times 1 is 1. So we can get rid of that 1. So now we just have y, and half of 6 is 3. Okay? Because we don't really need to see this here. It can disappear, right? We don't ever really need to see that 1 in the denominator. So if you want to let that go, you can let that go. All right. And this is our final answer. So putting all of our properties together, saving that distributing last, moving everything first when we are doing division. Okay? All right. Again, if you need to see those other examples that were not completed in this video, you can go to the content library and check your answers if you want a little bit more practice.